All right, I'm excited to have my friend Linda Fogg-Phillips here with me. Linda, welcome. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks for having me.
So I want to talk a little bit about resilience.
Mm,
This is a big thing for you, and this is a buzzword that is
yeah.
out on the interwebs, and I think very few people understand it. I think it's one of those things that people make a big deal out of when they. I'm not trying to minimize people, but you've
Yeah.
been through a lot of stuff.
I have.
Um, Give everyone a little bit of background, like your family and all of that.
All right. Buckle your seatbelts because here we go. So I am the mom of 8 children. It was a choice. I love my kids, and that was by design. And not design that I love them. Of course, I love them, but having a large family was by design. But comes with that are a lot of challenges, as you know, simply because there's so many different variables. And probably one of the first things in the last decade and a half that really started my journey of learning and growing. I'm not going to say trials because I think it's taught me a lot. It's helped me grow and also in turn help other people. Was the death of my 20-year-old son, Garrett, to an accidental Oxycontin overdose. That was devastating to us. It took me quite a while. You just don't overcome those kinds of things, but it took me quite a while to learn to live with that ongoing pain that any parent that's lost a child feels. And I struggled the very first year to the point where I didn't want to get out of bed. I didn't want to function. I didn't want to take care of my other kids. I just wanted to curl up in a ball and let life go on and not engage at all. In fact, my husband and I are triathletes, and we used to ride our bikes together, and I'd always get to the really close to the white line on the road. And Brent would always say, Linda, get closer in here to the bike lane. You're going to get hit. And my response is, I don't care if I get hit. That's where my mindset was at that point in time. About a year after Garrett passed away, I had a very severe horse accident, one that should have killed me. At this time, we were living on a 5-acre horse ranch. Horses were my life. This was my dream. My daughters competed. I did a lot of competition with hunter jumper and dressage riding. And I went out on an evening ride with a number of friends. It was a charity ride. My husband and my daughter went with us. There was about 30 of us that took our horses out to the desert of Nevada to do a moonlight ride. And during the course of this ride, the horse that I was on, very large horse, 17 hands, about 1,700 pounds, very solid horse, for some reason got spooked, and he reared up and fell over on top of me. It crushed me. I lost consciousness. I was then airlifted to the trauma hospital in Las Vegas. And I didn't regain consciousness until the next day. And when I regained consciousness, the first words that I heard was, your life has just been saved, and you better damn well figure out why. That was like an awakening for me. I realized, and I truly feel that was God talking to me. Mm-hmm. I realized that I need to pull myself out of my pity party and off my pity pot and get my act together, and to really go on a journey of figuring out, what is my purpose? Why did God save my life? I did have a helmet on, so that helped. I would have definitely been killed. But I spent a week in the ICU unit at the hospital, and then when I came home, it was 3 months where I could not really walk around because my concussion was so severe. Every rib in my body was broken. But I'm very grateful my back wasn't broken, or my legs weren't broken, or there wasn't something else that was broken. So I was able to recover from that. And that really put me on a journey to really understand, what is it that God has in store for me? Why has my life been saved? And that was just the beginning of a myriad of other challenges, which you and I have talked about, but they include having a daughter who has bipolar illness that's constantly stable and unstable, in and out of the hospital. It's just, that is a challenge in and of itself as much as losing my son. Mm-hmm. The fact that my daughter's still alive with her bipolar illness journey is nothing short of miraculous. Mm-hmm. Shortly after my horse accident, we lost our home building business in Las Vegas. Mm-hmm. This was during the housing crisis and recession. We had a very profitable home building business. Sorry. We'd had it for 25 years. And because of the recession, and because we were a family-run business, we didn't have the deep pockets like the national builders had. We ended up having to lay off my son, my son-in-law, my brother, and a lot of other family members that worked with us. Shortly after that, we ended up filing a $160 million bankruptcy, Chapter 7. So it completely wiped us out. We lost everything. Also, in tandem to that, my husband started having some cognitive issues that I was noticing, and it made me a little bit concerned because he's a really savvy businessman, great entrepreneur, had built several successful businesses, but he just wasn't making great decisions. And so Dr. Daniel Amen, who was a friend of mine, I called and talked to him a little bit about this.
Sure.
And he encouraged me, along with the family doctor, encouraged me to get Brent into a neurologist to see what was going on. Shortly after we ran enough tests, he was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's at the age of 58. I still had children at home, had children in college, and this was really a blow of me realizing we're never going to be able to rebuild our home building business. That now the weight of supporting my children and providing for them was squarely on my shoulders. And I was starting from ground zero. We had nothing in our bank account. Fortunately, all of our debts were wiped out because of the Chapter 7. But I had to sell different things that I owned in order to pay our rent. And we lost our home. We lost our horse ranch. But I had to sell things just to buy groceries for a period of time to provide for my children. So that was a really, really hard time. In the process, and of course this is about 15-year span of going through a lot of these trials, it was just, it seemed like one after another. It's like, wow, it's like, God, come on, give me a break. I need a break here. But I think he was really grooming me and teaching me how to be resilient, how to bounce back. And one of the tools in the tool chest that my brother BJ gave me was what we now call the Maui habit. It was at a time where I was really overwhelmed, I felt discouraged. And even though, I feel like I was starting to navigate my son's death a little bit better and be more functional, I was still pretty depressed. And one day on a call, BJ said to me, he said, "Hey, Linda, why don't you try this tiny habit?" And this was early in the tiny habits days, probably 2012. This habit didn't have a name at this time. But as he explained the habit to me, I thought, what, are you crazy? How's this going to help me? And the habit was, after I put my feet on the floor in the morning, I will say it's going to be a great day, and then celebrate. Well, realizing that BJ was probably a pretty smart guy, and that this would take me maybe 10 seconds to do in the morning, and it's like, well, why not try it? So I started practicing that habit. 3 days into practicing that habit, what I noticed is a shift of my mindset. I was able to move myself out of a victim mindset into a victor mindset by just simply doing that tiny habit. And of course, the important part was the celebration, which is releasing endorphins and dopamine on demand that reinforces that behavior. It's part of the tiny habits process that we teach, is the celebration, the instant celebration. And so that very quickly shifted my mindset to say, okay, I can do this. I can overcome this. It also helped me realize that I was giving the situations in my day and my challenges the power to control my day and to control me. By practicing the Maui habit, it gave me the power back for me to control my day instead of the opposite. My day controlling me, me controlling my day. That's a habit that I've practiced every single day since that time. Simply because I find that it gives me the strength, it gives me the ability to say, yes, it's going to be a great day. Now, let me quantify that a little bit, because sometimes I get pushbacks from clients on this, and they say, well, not every day is a great day. And that's true. We all have hard days. But what I've learned with that habit, and you'll laugh at this. My nickname, I'm the oldest of 7 children. So yeah, we loved kids in our family. And my siblings and my parents call me literal Linda, meaning if it doesn't make sense, I don't do it. I question everything. I'm very analytical. And it's like, well, why would I do that? That's one of the reasons I questioned BJ telling me to practice his habits. Like, well, this makes no sense to me. But because of that literal nature, I've been able to really test out all these processes of what works and how to help me be more resilient, how to help me bounce back. So where I'm going with this is, during my husband's illness, we had some really, really difficult times, like really hard days. Like days here again, I just wanted to punch a hole in the wall because I wasn't going to punch him, obviously. It wasn't his fault. But it was like, oh my gosh. And as he progressed through his journey, there was a time that, it was just in order to work. And I was building the Tiny Habits Academy at that time, and it was getting some traction. And so that was really about an 8 to 12 hour a day job, as you know, as you start off a business. Brent wasn't doing very well. He couldn't dress himself. He couldn't bathe himself. He couldn't, he couldn't brush his own teeth. That's the point that the Alzheimer's had progressed to, where he could not function. He also had what they call aphasia, where he could not communicate. His ability to talk and communicate had been impacted as the front part of his brain declined and deteriorated. So I found myself putting him on a paratransit, a bus for older people, and sending him to an adult daycare during the day so that I could work. And oftentimes when I sent him off, I would just dissolve into tears because it was really hard. And I noticed that I started to go back down this negative slope of, I can't do this, or this is so hard, or, poor me type of thinking. And I realized again, hey, I can create a tiny habit that helps me stay positive and have the ability and the resilience to continue to move forward through these challenges, and especially during this time when my business was needing a lot of my attention, my kids were needing my attention, obviously my husband as well. And so this is a habit that I designed to help me celebrate. And the celebration, again, is the releasing of positive emotions, or just saying, yay me, or good job, or way to go, some way that makes you feel good. And by this point in time, I had learned enough about that process and celebration to realize that it was really positive in our lives. And it was really positive in my life, and that I needed to do that consistently. I also realized that as I was getting back into the depression cycle, that I needed to celebrate throughout the day. I needed to celebrate on not just once or twice, but throughout the whole day. And so the tiny habit that I designed was purely for the purpose of doing something that I could celebrate. So I looked for an anchor moment that occurred frequently. The anchor moment that I attached a new behavior to was flushing the toilet. Yeah, we all flush the toilet about 7 times a day.
Yeah.
And so the habit was, after I flush the toilet, I will think of one person that I'm grateful for that has made a difference in my life. And then I'd celebrate that I had them in my life. The people that I used, or that I would think, and it would be different. Some days it would be different. Sometimes it would be the same person, or several people over and over. I never told them that I was doing this. But what happened was, I then was able to pull myself out of feeling like, oh, I'm all alone in this struggle. I'm all alone in this challenge. Even though cognitively I knew I wasn't. Right. In my heart, I felt that I was. I felt the burden of that. And so by doing this habit, it helped my heart know that I had people all around me that at a second's notice would step in to lift me up, or step in to help me, or had made a difference in my life and were there for me. And so that, again, quickly changed my trajectory from going down into a slump to being back up on a level on a plane where I was productive, I was happy, I was positive, and I was helpful in serving my children and my husband. So that's, one of the habits that's really been efficient for me. And I know you have questions, but let me go back to the Maui habit. As was expected with my husband's journey with Alzheimer's, he did pass away. We lost him 3 years ago to the results of early onset Alzheimer's. During those days, and it was the middle of COVID, so here again, we still sort of a very isolated time for many, many people, but we were given permission to have a viewing and a funeral for him. Now, we've lived in the Las Vegas community. Well, at the time that he passed, we'd been there for 37 years. And so he is very well known in the community. And I knew there were a lot of people that would want to come pay their respects to him. And so we did have a COVID-style funeral and viewing. And as those days came up, I knew those were going to be hard days. And my literal Linda side kicked in. And it's like, I cannot say it's going to be a great day, because they're going to be the worst days of my life. I mean, for anybody they would be. I thought these are going to be really hard days. And so I changed that habit to be, after my feet hit the floor in the morning, what I said on those 2 days is, I'm going to make it a great day for those that come to pay their respects to Brent. Yeah. So my focus was on the individuals that came out of their way in the middle of COVID to see us and to pay their respects to him. And that helped me, here again, move out of my poor me mindset that many of us that have challenges get stuck in, and it's not helpful for anyone. But instead, I focused on those that were coming through the line, or those that came to visit with us. As a result, those 2 days were great days. They were great days for me and for my family. I could have never guessed that would be the result. Not only that, since that time, people that came to the funeral and the viewing, that have crossed my path since then, have shared with me how uplifted they were as a result of coming. And there's no question in my mind why. It's because I set my intention on acknowledging them instead of feeling sorry for myself. Yeah, I know it's a lot, right?
That is, that's a lot. it's just incredible that you're here,
Thank you.
you know, and you're happy. And like, I enjoy being around you, and I see everybody and your kids, and like, yeah, it's just incredible. When you were like, there's a saying like the days are long, but the years are short, like in raising kids. But you know, when people go through hard times, the days are long and the years are long.
Yeah.
When you kind of look at, you mentioned like you dip down into like the victim mindset and why woe is me. Did you ever kind of take on that identity? Did you ever feel like this is my, like as a parent, like we have a lot of parents watching, and you know, they feel very responsible for what happens to a child, like, okay, overdose or struggling with a mental
Illness.
anything.
Yeah.
How did that relate to, how strong was that for you? Like, you're learning these habits, you're as you're going, you know, your brother is a Stanford researcher and New York Times bestselling author, so you're going to listen to some of what he shares. But how, like, you wake up in the morning, you say that, and then do you notice, like, gosh, like an hour later, 2 hours later, or you, like that afternoon, I'm just back down in the dumps. And then it's just you're just kind of like trying to keep the beach ball in the air. You know what I mean? Like,
It's almost like a yo-yo where it's like,
okay.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
How does processing all of that though fit in? So for me, when I've gone through really tough times, I've noticed, for better or worse, and I wish I knew a lot of the stuff that, you know, you knew back then. I probably would have been better off for it. But where does sitting with it and processing through it, journaling through it, meditating, do you do any of that? Is that part of, how does that all fit in?
Yeah, I do all of that.
Okay.
I learned meditation, I guess it was 4 years ago. And that has really helped me, I don't want to say quiet my mind, but has helped. Learning meditation, when I was working with my meditation coach, I became very emotional. And I even told her, I said, I don't know why I'm crying. She says, you've got all these emotions and feelings that you've hidden away and you've tucked down deep, and they need to come out. And so that made me okay with it, that when I meditate, sometimes I would have those emotions surface. And that's one way of processing it. And yeah, so that's important. The other thing that I think is important that I've had to learn myself is, well, for example, you know, my son that passed away, I will tell you one thing, losing a child was harder for me than losing my spouse. It's not that I didn't love my spouse or, you know, love him any less than I love Garrett, but it was just different. When a parent loses a child, it just leaves a hole in your heart that is just never filled. And so the process of learning to live with that pain, because that pain's not going away. It doesn't matter what anybody tells you. Time does not heal. Sorry, I about swore. Time does not heal. That's BS. But what time does is it allows you to live with the pain. And eventually you live with it in a manner that, this sounds weird, but it ends up being comforting because it reminds you of that individual and how much you love them and how important they were in your life. So with both Garrett, my son's death, and my husband's death, Brent, we have now as a family, we have what we call their angel days. It's just like a birthday, but it's the day that they passed away. And on those angel days, I block those days out. I don't work, and instead I spend time with family, and we honor that individual on those days. The first couple of times that we did an angel day for Garrett were days that I just planned on staying in bed, and I didn't want to get out. I think when we're hurting or when we're grieving, we still need to honor that pain and give that pain space to be felt and to be processed. Doesn't mean that's necessarily going to go away, but it helps you develop new skills to function productively and positively with those scars, with those bruises, with those cuts, with those pains that you carry. Otherwise, they would be destructive. They would destroy us completely. And so on Brent's Angel Day and Garrett's Angel Day, I just know those are sacred days. I don't plan things. I plan on either being with my family or being in meditation. And my kids are very respectful of this, knowing that sometimes during those days, I just need the morning to myself. I need to journal, I need to process, I need to reflect, and I need to meditate. but also typically on those days as a family. And even my kids that live out of town will come into town for these days. We'll go to either Garrett's favorite place for dinner or Brent's favorite place for dinner in a way to celebrate them. And so oftentimes when we have tragedies like this, we want to push it out of the way or pretend like it didn't ever happen. And I think those just fester as opposed to really growing and learning and just trying to understand, what do I need to learn through this process, and how can I be a better person through this process, and how can I help others who will be on this journey at some point in time. In fact, there's a saying that I always keep in my mind pretty present, and that is to be better, not bitter. There's so many things that can cause us to be bitter in our lives, but if we change that or look at that differently, and this goes into the Pearl Habits part of taking those irritants or those pains or those difficult situations and designing how are we going to respond when we feel that pain, or how are we going to respond when that that thing that irritates us surfaces. Mm-hmm. And for me, I oftentimes will remind myself, you need to be better, not bitter. And that oftentimes will pull me out of the, where, in my opinion, and many others' opinion, the very well-earned position of being bitter and angry and negative. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't serve anybody. It doesn't serve me. It doesn't serve my family.
A few years ago, I was at Disney World for the first time in like 12 years. And the last time I'd gone, those previous 12 years, was right before I got married. Mm. And I went with the girl I eventually married and my future mother-in-law. And that was the last time I was at Disney. And a friend asked me to come speak at his event. Mm. And it was at Disney. And I was like, this is going to be a huge trigger. Because I am one of those guys, because I did not know these habits. I would overthink. I would just, I tended to be really nostalgic. Like like I think about stuff deeply. Like I remember things. Like there's a lot of meaning that I give to a lot of these like little things. So I'm like, oh man, the last time I was here, that was my life. And these people are no longer in my life. And I remember telling him, I was like, hey, I'd love to come to speak, but I've got to be open about something. It's pretty personal. I'd love to come and support your event. But the last time I was at Disney was with, my ex, and before we got married. So it like symbolized a lot, right? I'm like, the last time I was here, I was, young, and I was like vibrant, and I was like really like looking forward to life. And then now it's like that thing's gone now. Yeah. He said to me, says Terry Weaver, I'll give him a shout out from the conference, The Thing. Once in a while, Terry says smart things. I'm just kidding. He's a smart guy. And he goes, sometimes the best way to delete a file is to save over it. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, that's actually the smartest thing I've ever heard you say, bro. That was it actually got me out of bed, got me out of my room. I went to all the events for the event. I went to all the dinners. I was able to be really present with my friends who were speaking at the event, all other people I knew. And it got me out of that like wallowing and like the kind of nostalgia that's not helpful to you. And it was and I've been to Disney like 3 or 4 times since, right? But that really was like, you talked about sand, right? Like in the Pearl, but it was like, if that was an hourglass and I felt stuck, what he said just like flicked one piece of sand and just allowed it all to flow. But there are people who wrestle a lot with triggers. Mm-hmm. They do get triggered. I think of another lady I know. I used to actually work for her. And when I worked for her, she never drove anywhere. She couldn't drive because she had been in a really bad accident when she was younger. And I think she lost a loved one in the accident. And she just could not, because at this point, I had not seen her for like 8 years or when we reconnected. I couldn't believe she drove. I was like, oh, and you drive. Not very well, but you do. Like you just drive in like less than a mile. But I was like, wow, this is incredible. Like I was so happy to see this. All that said, people do wrestle with triggers. There are triggers that come up. What did you do during those times where you talk about going back to a restaurant like Garrett liked to eat it? Like how, like when you pull it, like how do you stop? Or how did you process through all like, I used to walk here across this parking lot with him. I was sitting in this seat. How do you deal with triggers?
Uh, you know, and in the tiny habits vernacular, and I'm going to clarify this because we all have triggers. We all have things that set us off or things that take us back to a time that was not very pleasant or pulls up emotions that aren't pleasant that we don't know how to deal with, or fears. With tiny habits, we use trigger in the sense that, and I know a lot of other habit formations use trigger to create a new habit. We don't. We use the word prompt because trigger is usually associated with those negative feelings or those negative experiences. And so that's why we don't use the word trigger to build a new habit. We use the word prompt. What anchor moment is going to tell you to do the next step that's going to prompt you. But to answer your question about dealing with triggers, I really feel that acknowledging those and realizing whatever it is that triggers you, what it's associated with, and recognizing that, and this is where journaling comes in. I think it's really important to write out your feelings because it's a way to process. It's a way to think through. And oftentimes in journaling, at least in my experience, I see new insights. I see things that I didn't see before that when I put pen to paper starts to surface. And I do think, and as you know, I'm very religious, I do sometimes think as I'm writing, God's giving me the answers that I wouldn't have come to on my own. And so with triggers, I do think you need to acknowledge them. You need to be aware of what feelings they're providing for you. But I also feel, and I agree with your friend, to overwrite them is really the best way to diffuse them for a negative result. I mean, having them go off or having them trigger you usually is a negative result. And to diffuse that negativity is you need to really specifically say, okay, when I have this feeling, how do I want to respond? You want to respond instead of react. And this is really where the Pearl Habits method comes in, is like you mentioned before, it's that little grain of sand that's the irritant, or the grain of sand that's the trigger. But how are we going to respond to that grain of sand where we start layering and layering mother of pearl over that, so that it then becomes a gem and a gift to not just ourselves, but those around us. And that has to be done very consciously and very intentionally. So for example, like when, let me think of a good example here I'll give you an example of a reaction and a response. And this is a very, very telling thing on me as a parent. No, I'm not the world's best parent. I've learned how to be better. My children are all adults now. And it's really funny because when we get together, I feel like they're roasting me all the time. You did this and you did that.
Well, what do they expect? There's 8 of them. My God. Have a heart.
Yeah. But, I know. It was a lot. It was a lot. I don't know how I did it. But for example, when my son, Brandon, was, I guess he was about 4 years old, my parents had come back from Germany and brought me this beautiful Yadro that I just cherished. And I had it on an area on a table I probably shouldn't have had there in my family room. And one day he was playing and knocked it over and it shattered. I was livid. And in order to make I was just so upset that he was so careless and that he wasn't watching what he was doing. Of course, he was pretty young, but I was just really upset that he was so careless that it broke this beautiful, and now it's like, it's just a worldly possession. It doesn't really matter, know. But what I did is I went and got his favorite blanket and I cut a corner out of it. Terrible parenting. Don't do that.
Oh my God, I love it. I actually love that. Okay.
I cut a corner out of it to show him how much that hurt me, that he was so careless. And now I was going to cut a corner out of his favorite blanket. Guess what? I had no idea the impact that I had on him. That still comes up today in family meetings or family events, that I cut a corner out of his favorite blanket. He's been damaged by that. But that's an example of a reaction. When we react,
You reacted, not him. Yeah, he was responding, right? Yeah. Okay.
I reacted in a negative way. And typically when we react, we regret what we did. I regret that. There's other parenting things obviously I regret too. But the Pearl Habits helps you anticipate those type of situations and design how you're going to respond so you don't react negatively. And I think triggers come into that where you're going to have, when you knew you're going to Disneyland, if something like that's coming up that is associated with a bad experience, a bad feeling, or pulls up negative emotions, when that occurs, how are you going to design how to respond to that and respond differently, like overwrite that program? And that's what I have found has given me a lot of the coping skills that I implement today to really navigate the storms of life. We still have them. I still have storms. As I've shared, my daughter that has bipolar illness, she's just, the last 3 years have been nothing short of hell for not just her, but for all of us. And it's been a really difficult emotional journey for me as a parent, because here again, I should have done this, I should have done that. And that, there's no sense in that other than if you're going to learn from it. But, with Amber, and she's given me permission to talk pretty freely about what she's been through the last few years. But as a parent, at one point, in fact, even around my other kids, there was a period of time where I didn't even know where she was. She didn't have a cell phone. I knew she was in the San Bernardino area. I hadn't heard from her. I knew she's in and out of hospitals, because they would call me whenever they found her on the street and take her back in, because she clearly was not in good place mentally. It got to the point where every morning I started functioning out of a place of fear. And this was as recent as 2 years ago. I was fearful for her and her well-being. I was fearful for what was going on. I felt very helpless. That every morning, one of the first things I would do is I'd pull up the coroner's report in San Bernardino and make sure she wasn't on there.
Holy cow. Okay.
So, and I guess my point of that is we all have these challenges, but it really depends on how we respond to them and whether we use them to learn and grow, or whether they cause us to be stuck and bitter where we're at. And even through this challenge with Amber, and yes, I finally found her, went up and got her, took her back to Utah and got her in the hospital where she needed to be, where they were familiar with her and helped her get stable. But when I'm on these kinds of journeys, or when I'm faced with these kinds of challenges that are new to me or make me uncomfortable, one of the Pearl habits that I've developed that really has helped me a lot is, when I'm facing a challenge that I don't know how it's going to go, I will remind myself that this is an adventure. That's talking to my mind. Oh, this is an adventure. I wonder what God wants me to learn. So I'm able to reframe it. And that's a lot of what I think these triggers are, is giving you an opportunity to reframe that experience so it's more positive. And in this case, and this has helped me a lot, is when I get in a situation where I'm apprehensive or it's new, it's like, this will be an adventure. Adventures are fun. I wonder what I'm going to learn or discover on this adventure. And it puts me in more of a mindset where I'm teachable and I'm ready to learn, as opposed to closing that off and saying, oh no, this is scary. So that's really helped me a lot with things like this.
I know that there are some people who are watching or listening right now, and we're like concurrently amazed at what you've been through and how you've moved through life. And then oddly enough, on the flip side of that coin, there are people right now who feel bad that they're complaining about their own life. They're like, I've never had it anywhere near as hard as her. Therefore, my problems must not matter. Like, I'm making a big deal out of nothing, right? It's sort of like, my parents used to say this stuff all the time. Like, I didn't want to eat that for dinner. There are people starving in Africa. Eat the food, right? And like, there's that guilt and shame part, right? And I think it's a really dicey line, right? Like, where you're realizing I can be stronger than I am right now. Like, I got to suck it up, Buttercup. And then also not invalidate your own pain and your own trauma. I was joking before about, the cutting the book. Come on, give her a break. I mean, yes, dude, give her a break, you kids. And that was really painful, right? So what do you say to clients or anyone you speak to? I know you speak in front of a lot of business audiences and so forth as well, who we have this saying on the internet in the United States, first world problems.
Yeah.
Like, it shouldn't be that big of a deal. How do you navigate that, and how to help people navigate that?
Well, and I love that you bring this up, Mike. My opinion is, what might be hard for me, is it going to be hard for somebody else? And not to don't minimize people's challenges. It's a real challenge. I've had things that have upset my apple cart that were maybe I went to put on a dress that I wanted to wear that day and it was dirty. It's like, oh, why so dirty? But, it's not a contest. It's not who has the most challenges or who has the biggest problems. It's not a contest. Our challenges that we face are unique to us. And as a result, I'm going to go back to, I really view them as an opportunity to learn, an opportunity to grow. And it's not a matter of, oh, why shouldn't I, well, I'm going to stop complaining, or it's first world problems. Yeah, it's first world problems, but they're still your problem. They're still your challenge. They're still causing you pain, anger, and grief. And so I don't think they should be minimized. That's, and I think what's important though is to have coping skills, which Tiny Habits and Pearl's Habits have given me. I tell BJ all the time, you have saved my life. I said, if there's nobody else in the world that you designed the Tiny Habits method other than for me, it's been very effective and it's been very helpful. You've truly saved my life. He's helped me learn the skills that I've needed to implement to rise above those challenges and to come out. I'm not on top because I'm not, I'm still in the face of them. The only time I'll be on top is when I'm in heaven, I hope. But, he's given me the ability to develop the skill set to constantly bounce back. We talked about resilience before, and one of my, well, it's my quote, so I'm going to quote myself. Because one of my favorite quotes is, resilience is action in the face of fear. We all have situations that we're fearful of. But what's important is that we push through those and that we do it in a manner that's productive and that allows us to grow and learn, as opposed to having that fear push us back. And that's really what I think resilience is having the courage and the strength. And courage is in there too. I quoted myself wrong. Resilience is having the courage and strength to move forward. The courage is knowing that you have the skills and the ability to design the life that you want. The strength is the past history and record that you have, the evidence that you've been able to do that. I still have bad days. I still have challenges. My daughter Amber is doing quite well right now. I could not have said that 2 months ago. And at one point, it was probably 3 years ago, when we were struggling with her a lot. And this was also shortly after my husband passed away, and he was always so good with her. He was much better with her at helping her navigate her bipolar illness than I was. And I was at a stage where I was angry that Brent was gone. And I was angry that I was having to deal with this. And I was angry that I didn't have the skills to help her. The guilt, which I don't think guilt is productive. We need to free ourselves from that guilt. But we all feel those feelings. And I was angry. And even some of my kids were at my house and I said, I'm going to give up. I can't do this anymore. There's nothing I can do to help her or save her. And fortunately, my kids said, Mom, you can't do that. They said, you can't give up. They said, maybe you need a day or two to just break away from all of the drama and everything that's going along with that, but you can't give up. So there are times where I feel like giving up too. But then, and that's okay. I think you need to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
But then it's like, even if you give up, how do you pick yourself back up off the floor and move forward in a manner that makes you feel like, okay, yeah, this is hard, but this is what I'm learning. This is the kind of person that I'm becoming. This is the kind of person that I want to become as a result of this trial or this challenge. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. I just so admire you and have so much respect for what you've built in your life in face of all the challenges. And it's a price that none of us can identify. I think most of us cannot identify with paying. But we're all here to benefit from the pearls of wisdom that you share. So thanks so much for taking time out and being with us today. And I know you speak to a lot of audiences, and I hope that anyone out there who may be watching will consider having Linda come and speak to your company, to your church, to your organization, your business, or just to you, or that kid that's giving you a hard time. No, I'm just kidding, right? But no,
send him my way. I'll set him straight.
Yeah, fix him right. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you,
today.
Mike. Thank you.